So, we will be watching what powers does Gandalf have. If you are watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you're watching on Twitch, follow the stream. Or combine both and subscribe on YouTube whilst simultaneously watching on Twitch. None of that made sense. Let's get into the movie. Video, film, reaction.
For a mighty wizard, we don't often see Gandalf actually use his powers, and when he does, they sometimes seem a little underwhelming. So, what magic can he do?
Exactly why I said, in the movies, just based off the movies, Dumbledore would beat Gandalf. Just based off the movies. But then, you know, we looked into more of the lore, and it wasn't even close. It wasn't even close. So I fought the lore, and the lore won. See what I did there? Because lore and lore. Let's just move on.
Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek.
That was a good one, halfway
with support from Skillshare, the online learning platform. And I have a special offer for you from them at the end of this video, so please stick around for that. Gandalf is introduced to us in both The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit in the Shire as a great wizard, but to the hobbits that really seems to just mean someone who is good at making fireworks. True. Fair enough, you might think. These are the simple expectations of a simple people who know little of the world outside the Shire. But if you start thinking about it, it's actually quite hard to think of when Gandalf does use his magic powers in any significant way, not like magicians in many other high fantasy worlds. He certainly never throws fireballs at the Nazgul, or teleports himself anywhere, or makes himself invisible, or throws up force fields, or anything like that. So what powers does he have? Is he really a powerful magic user, or are the hobbits right? Is he just a wise old man?
He's not a DPS. You need to understand this, right? Gandalf's not DPS. Except for when he fought the Balrog. Actually, never mind. He is a DPS. He's bloody everything.
And he can do a few tricks and make some really, really impressive fireworks. Well, the first thing to understand about Gandalf and his magic, and we'll come back to this later, is that it is almost never showy. Gandalf does use magic many times during The Lord of the Rings, but it's almost always in a subtle way, not drawing attention to himself, to the extent that readers often miss it and even other characters in the story don't realise that he is doing it. But the fact is that the closer you analyse the text, the more often you start to notice Gandalf operating magically, and he is almost always doing it secretly or quietly. So
that's true.
What magic powers does he have? We should start by recognising that Gandalf himself is a magical being. He is not just an old man who has learned some spells. He is a Maya, created by the thought of Eru Ilúvatar himself. He is immortal and able to take different forms, hence him being able to bodily die as Gandalf the Grey and return as Gandalf the White. He has powers of foresight. He knows the fate of some things to come, if not all of the details. It's no coincidence that he formed an attachment to the hobbits of the Shire. He knew they had an important role to play. And he knew that Gollum had a role to play before the end, for good or ill, as he says. Maiar are powerful, spiritual beings who can see and exist on a different, more spiritual plane than mere mortals. He can sense things that others can't.
What is that? Does he have a magical ferret? What is that white thing? Also, there's so much about the... I guess they're called the Maiar. I'm just going to call them wizards. That we just don't know, chat. Honestly. All we know is that, my God, are their beards beautiful.
Seeing Frodo after he received and was healed from his wound the Morgul blade had caused, he saw him as a little more transparent. And Gandalf was able to see the magical west gate of Moria. Not even Gimli could see that until Gandalf revealed it. Gandalf sees things others don't. This and his foresight undoubtedly played into something which isn't a power per se, but proved crucial in the success of the ring quest. His wisdom. Knowing to trust Frodo with the ring, and to launch that seemingly hopeless attack on the Black Gates of Mordor in order to win Frodo and Sam a clearer run at Mount Doom. Being a Maya didn't make Gandalf omniscient or all-powerful. What happened at Moria proved that, but it did mean that he had a base level of power that very few other people in Middle-earth possessed. And the moment he arrived in Middle-earth, he was immediately gifted a magical item that gave him even more power. Círdan the elf gave him Narya, one of the 3 elven rings of power. I talked about this at length in another video, but very broadly speaking, it seems to have 2 huge impacts. First, it gave him the power of encouragement, to himself and to others. This is what Círdan says when he gives the ring to Gandalf. It will support you in the weariness that you have taken upon yourself. For this is the Ring of Fire, and with it you may rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill.
God,
Gandalf does not weary.
Everything in this film and this book series, everything, right? Oh, just so worded beautifully. Like, let's get a replay. Let's get a replay right there.
The ring to Gandalf. It will support you in the weariness that you have taken upon yourself. For this is the Ring of Fire, and with it you may rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill.
And man, did he
Gandalf
rekindle hearts.
Does not weary, not even when things get very tough, and those around him are filled with hope. Encouragement of others is not a power easy to quantify, but it is noticeable that when Gandalf is there, his companions feel hope and a sense of direction, and when he isn't, despair so often creeps in. The second thing Narya, the Ring of Fire, seems to do is give Gandalf great power over fire. There are those fireworks, of course, but there are so many other moments we see Gandalf do small bits of fire magic. Lighting campfires when the wood is soaking wet, lighting the way through Moria, throwing magical flaming pine cones down onto wolves, and standing firm against the Balrog. That's a lot of fire resistance going on just there.
That's true.
But Gandalf doesn't just use fire magic. We see him do a lot of other different kinds of magic. He mentions offhandedly that he used to know over 200 different spells to open doors, and in Moria he uses a spell to close a door and keep it closed. A couple of times we see him change his appearance to seem taller and more imposing, and he struck Grima voiceless when in Edoras. He also seems to have some combat spells, at least in facing off against the Nazgul and other creatures of darkness. In Moria, he pushes his staff through a broken door and light bursts forth, blinding their opponents and buying the Fellowship some time. When he rode to rescue Faramir, the Nazgul were wheeling overhead on their fell beasts. Gandalf raised his hand and light burst forth. The Nazgul gave a cry and swerved away. And earlier at Weathertop, when Gandalf met the Nazgul on his own, he unleashes a flurry of light and fire that Frodo and Aragorn see from many miles away. He drives the Nazgul off. It's perhaps a nerdily nuanced point, but I suppose the magic Gandalf uses in combat isn't really combat magic. There are no lightning bolts or fireballs here incinerating opponents. Instead, Gandalf tends to use his powers over light and fire to drive enemies away or buy some time.
Diversion.
You shouldn't forget Gandalf's mind magic. He is clearly a telepath of some kind. I'll pick up on this in more detail in another video because Tolkien had a lot to say about telepathy in Middle-earth, but there are lots of examples of Gandalf communicating with his mind. He tells Frodo in Rivendell that he knows exactly what happened to him because he could hear his thoughts. He seems to have some mental connection with Shadowfax, being able to communicate with him from miles away. And as everyone is returning home at the end of the story, we read that Gandalf, Celeborn, Galadriel and Elrond would talk to each other without moving or speaking with their mouths, just mind to mind. And we can probably add telekinesis to telepathy. He breaks Saruman's staff simply by saying, "Saruman, your staff is broken." And when Aragorn, Gimli and Legolas meet Gandalf the White and mistake him for Saruman, he lifts his staff and Gimli's axe goes flying. Aragorn's sword blazed into fire, and Legolas, against his will, fired his knocked arrow into the sky, not at Gandalf. Impressive stuff. So, far from Gandalf not being very powerful...
And wasn't I can't remember, but wasn't he floating? I can't remember. Maybe he was just really tall in that scene.
He actually seems to be able to cover almost every magical base. Fire magic, mental magic, water magic, lockpicking, light, and so on. In just this one short video, we've seen well over a dozen completely different ways in which Gandalf has used magic, in addition to his innate abilities as a Maya. And I promise you, there are many other instances I haven't mentioned. Gandalf knows lots of magic. He may not do flashy magic, but he uses the right magic for the right occasions. And his breadth of knowledge is astonishing. We've not even touched on his ability to read and use magical runes, his ability to maximize the power of magical weapons, like Glamdring shattering the Balrog's sword, or the wonderful hint that he may have blessed Barliman's beer at the Prancing Pony so that it was always excellent. So why do so many people leave reading The Lord of the Rings with the idea that Gandalf doesn't do much magic? I suppose it's probably in comparison to later high fantasy series and franchises where magic is often a lot more obvious. You wouldn't have to be a very high level wizard in Dungeons and Dragons, for example, to do most of what Gandalf does. But I think Gandalf's low-key magic usage is absolutely intentional by Tolkien. Gandalf seems loath to use magic, partly because it comes at a cost, it seems to tire him, and particularly when he is forced to do a word of command, which seems to be an especially taxing and mysterious form of magic, but we'll cover that as well in another video. But most importantly, Gandalf simply doesn't like to show off. Almost everything Gandalf does is humble. The one time he does seem to use his powers in a very showy way, fire and light, to drive away the Nazgul at Weathertop, he was on his own, not knowing that Frodo and Aragorn could see the night sky lit up from miles away. He seems to enjoy fanciful artistic flourishes with the fireworks, blowing fun smoke rings with Bilbo, and adding water horses to Elrond's water magic, washing the Black Riders away outside Rivendell, but when push comes to shove, he only does what is needed when it is needed. A lot of the time, people don't even notice when he is using magic. And ultimately, Gandalf's approach is proven right. You don't need to be showy to achieve things. He achieved his ultimate goal. Sauron was defeated.
How you doing, Yogs?
So often with Tolkien, it is the humble who win, and Gandalf is humble despite all his power.
Listen. I am a man. That's it, yeah.
By the end of it all, with Sauron's fall, the Balrog gone, the Witch King dead...
I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I admit I was wrong with the Dumbledore call. But what I don't admit is that in the movies, and I prefer Lord of the Rings to Harry Potter, as you can tell by completely forgetting the name of the movie. It would seem that in the movies, and I'm just saying the movies, Dumbledore is powerful. But, you know, watching this, like I said, even though Dumbledore has tons of subtle tricks as well, Gandalf is all about, you know, keeping it... How do I say this? Keeping it as subtle as possible. Like, unless he has to. Most of the time, he only uses crazy spells when he's pissed off. Like, with Saruman, or when he went, like, really, really tall when he was talking to Bilbo, which he really didn't have to do, because poor little Bilbo, mate, he's only about 3 foot tall, but, yeah, stuff like that. Fighting the Nazgul. I agree with it would seem. Yeah. Dumbledore, on the other hand, like this guy saying, he's probably not alluding to Dumbledore specifically. He actually mentioned D&D. But Dumbledore is much flashy. You see a lot of it. Although there is subtle stuff, right? Like, we watched a video where, you know, Hermione, Ron, and the other lad, Harry, go back in time. Remember using that spinny thing that Hermione has. Dumbledore knew, like, so he can, like, tell between times and stuff. Like, they're both insane. But obviously, you know, Gandalf being immortal is kind of, you know... Gandalf's a tryhard. Gandalf's a level 100 tryhard in the MMO. Dumbledore's like hit level 80, but... he's still... He can't... Gambledore... You know what? If they intertwined, Gambledore is the real winner here.
Dead and the dragons dead or diminished, Gandalf has a reasonable claim to be one of the most powerful beings left in Middle-earth.
Gambledore. Oh, mate, what have I created?
And yet, he hardly ever used the full extent of his
Sorry,
power.
let's go back.
Gandalf has a raw story to achieve things. He achieved his ultimate goal. Sauron was defeated. So often with Tolkien, it is the humble who win, and Gandalf is humble despite all his power. By the end of it all, with Sauron's fall, the Balrog gone, the Witch King dead, and the dragons dead or diminished, Gandalf has a reasonable claim to be one of the most powerful beings left in Middle-earth. And yet, he hardly ever used the full extent of his power, or at least he used his powers a lot, but rarely so people would notice.
That is true, it's true.
I told you
We will, shout out to this, what a video by the way. We will watch, I'd love to watch, and it will be coming soon, another Gandalf versus Dumbledore. Not because I think Dumbledore's going to win, I just want to see more perspectives of it, right? I think that's such a good, just fight, really. It's such a good talking point. I want to say 9 times out of 10, Gandalf wins. Can Dumbledore just have that 1 time out of 10, chat? Right? You know what? Let's say 1 time out of 25, right? Agreed? Agreed. Even though no one agreed, I'm going to assume that you guys agreed. Alright, to the comments. But that was good. I'm actually going to subscribe to this guy. Gandalf's greatest magic, to arrive precisely when he means to. Here it is. Yogs, there it is. Do not mistake me for some conjurer of cheap tricks. When you do things right, people won't be sure you've done anything at all. Oh! Oh! Beautiful. We should also remember that Gandalf fought the Balrog for 10 days and 10 nights without any rest. Did he? Oh. And on a mountaintop where the duel ended, the whole peak was covered in lightning. And as Gandalf threw the demon down, it split the mountain. We are talking about immense divine magic here, far beyond the power of mortals. Jeez. Who could have been here to witness a battle of 2 immense powers? Gandalf avoided truly destructive magic when his friends were close, aware that the full might of Great Maya could have killed them. And as the video says, he was humble. He was given instructions by Valar to guide and help the free peoples, not to dominate them. Gandalf followed this creed and won. Other Maya did not and failed. What are Gandalf's powers? Short answer, yes. Oh, that's so good. What are his powers? Yes. Dumbledore wins the catwalk and probably the dance-off. I'll take that. I'll take that. Now, who has a better beard is the true question. It's the true question that we must find out. One day we'll get to that. One day. Probably in my late years, you know, it'll take a couple of centuries. Wait, is it a century or is it a decade? What's 10 years? A decade, I think. A century? Oh, God. Oh, God. Dangerous, cried Gandalf. And so am I. Very dangerous. More dangerous than anything you will ever meet unless you were brought alive before the seat of the Dark Lord. God, imagine if Gandalf was evil. You don't have to, because I've already reacted to that. I did post that on my YouTube, right? If Gandalf took the ring? Yes, I did. So essentially, Gandalf is a max-level wizard character exclusively using base-level spells and buffs. I mean, kind of what I said, right? Yeah, I watched it, bro. Yogs. Do you love Lord of the Rings as much as I do? I need to do a film. I want to do a tier list of the Lord of the Rings films, the Star Wars films, and the Harry Potter films. I want to do a tier list. And man, that's going to be a tough tier list. That genuinely may take hours. Oh my, yeah. Like, believe it or not, although I'm a huge fan of Lord of the Rings, there may be some surprises in there, right? There may be some surprises in there. Like, you got to remember, we'd be talking about the films separately, not the whole thing. And by the way, I don't think I'm going to be putting the Hobbit films in there or anything like that. I'll be honest, I haven't watched the Hobbit films. I only watched one, and I watched two, but I barely remember it. I much preferred the book of the Hobbit when I was younger. But I'll have to watch the Hobbit soon again. But great video, really, really enjoyed that. Yeah.